modernity as defined in classical ways before this is really fully sufficient, self-sufficient, and in itself normative, just being modern. What I say, modernity has the normative capacity of expansion, of greater emancipation, but the real normative struggle throughout modernity continues. And the real struggle is between what I call multifaceted and totalistic views of modernity. And this is a clear value judgment, a clear normative value judgment, which we face all the time, continuously so, changing, and so on, that there is within modernities the continuous struggle between this is to me the major struggle, the major normative struggle, and which takes different forms in different historical periods. So I don't give up the normative, but I transfer it to within itself, within the problematique of modernity, not assuming that any concrete development of modernity is the ultimate normative answer.
And I would like to give the word right away to Professor Bhargava from the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, the most famous social science university in India, certainly.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Let me come straight to the point, and this is a Hegelian point to begin with. We know that when the time is ripe for an idea, then it begins to sprout in many heads. And in the 90s, in the early 90s, we began to hear not only of multiple modernities, but of alternative modernities, other modernities, different modernities, and so on. And we know that, we also know from Hegel that an idea begins to have a life much before its clear formulation and much before human beings bring it to full self-consciousness. And I was looking at, or plowing through Shmuel's writings, and particularly one that he'd written in 1957 called Some Aspects of Social Political Development in Underdeveloped Societies. And I found that, you know, this idea in its incipient form was already there way back in 1957. I know we're not supposed to be exegetical here, but nonetheless I thought it was worth making this point, where he urged us not to ignore the internal dynamics of society, where he asked us to look at the cultural underpinnings and dynamics of society, and said that if we do not give due recognition to this, then we would make the mistake of trying to assess how or how much political institutions in the so-called underdeveloped societies deviate from the Western political pattern. Instead, he said that we should attend to the ways in which these traditional institutions adapt and accommodate to aspects of modernity and evolve, and this is very important, evolve relatively new forms of political organization. He also pointed out that there are institutions developing in these societies which are not Western, which deviate from the Western, which are not Western, but which are in some ways both modern and alternative to Western institutions. So, the Argentinian writer Borges said somewhere that every new idea creates its own precursors, and I think we have here a case of one of the originators of this idea also being the precursors of the idea of multiple modernity. Okay, let me now briefly talk about how this idea can illuminate something that I've been interested in for some time, which is secularism. There is an argument in India, which has done the rounds very often, that modern secularism cannot develop in India or in South Asia because secularism is a gift of Christianity, and that it's unsuited to cultural conditions cannot really grow elsewhere. I've called it the cultural inadaptability thesis. And I think this view is mistaken for the reasons that Shmuel and others have pointed out. I think we can develop notions of secularism which are at once subcontinental or Indian and modern. So there can be multiple secularisms. But why is such a view, such as the one that I mentioned, taken seriously? I think it's taken seriously because of the identification of church-state separation with secularism, or because it is thought that church-state separation is a crucial, necessary part of the background cultural conditions of modern secularism. Now, the first idea that church-state separation is identical with modern secularism is mistaken, because all that church-state separation does is to distinguish modern secularism from theocracies. But church-state separation is entirely compatible with states that have strong and substantive establishment of religions. And modern political secularism developed precisely against this idea, because states which have strong and substantive establishments of religion are compatible both with intra-religious domination as well as with inter-religious domination, right? States with substantive and strong establishment of religion can hugely privilege one religion and therefore offend the idea of inter-religious equality, and they can be completely blind to internal religious freedoms, which again is not compatible with the idea of a society which is free of institutionalized religious domination. And in the West, I won't really go into this aspect because this is something I'm sure the cultural dynamics of Western societies, broadly speaking, is well known, but I would say that in the West, this idea, modern political secularism, has taken two forms. The metaphor of separation has been unpacked in two different ways. One is as one-sided exclusion. That is to say, the state can interfere in the affairs of religion, but religion is to be excluded from the affairs of the state, right? That's one form. The other is mutual exclusion, which is the classical American model, where the state will not interfere in the affairs of religion, and likewise religion will not interfere in the affairs of the state. Well, that's the two ways, prominent ways in which the metaphor of separation has been unpacked in most Western societies. And the question is, but for what? Why do we need this separation? And in broadly Western societies, the answer has been, as I said, to promote freedom and equality understood individualistically. And the third feature is that these are relatively homogeneous societies, so institutionalized religious domination has always been intra-religious domination. The question of how to deal with the domination of one religion by another, the domination of other religions by one religion, that is not a question that has been properly addressed. Yeah. Now, the Indian case, because of the civilizational background, is very, very different. And let me just come very briefly to it and then end. I know I've already taken more time than I should have, I think. But let me just quickly go through two or three points. One is, and this is again a point that Shmuel has emphasized a lot, the political center in the subcontinental ethos, civilizational ethos of India, has developed autonomously of the cultural order, which is to say the political identity of subcontinental societies, particularly Indian society, has been very different from the cultural identity of the society. And that means that the development of something like ethno-nationalism has been somewhat inhibited in these societies. Secondly, in Hinduism, there is no ecclesiastical order, and there is a separation of priestly and warrior functions, the Brahmin and the Kshatriya. So there is a role differentiation from a totally different cosmological system, pretty much in the same way as there is role in personal differentiation within Western societies. And third is that ultimate reality, and this I'm talking about in Indian civilization, of course, is much more than Hindu civilization, but I would sort of talk very briefly about Hindu civilization. The ultimate reality is in the Hindu order, without name, without form, without personality, and without qualities. And naming is somewhat a limitation. And that idea has encouraged the notion that people that can choose their own Ishtadevata, their own God, and also that there are different routes to the same God, right? And although initially this idea was limited to different sects within Hinduism, it didn't take long before this idea could also be extended not just to sects within Hinduism, but also to other religions. Therefore, the basic sort of background cultural condition within Indian society was, let's have opportunistic or principled distance of the state from religious in order to reduce, if not eliminate, inter-religious domination. Modern political secularism in India is a development of this idea. And it has to be said, it's because of its encounter with Western colonial modernity. So we have here, with the idea of the reduction of inter-religious domination, also the idea that we need separation to reduce or eliminate intra-religious domination. And this is something which I think comes with the encounter with Western colonial modernity, when ideas of freedom and equality get a new lease of life in this, because of this encounter. And secondly, the notion of separation is unpacked very, very differently in India. Separation does not mean exclusion. It doesn't mean one-sided exclusion. It doesn't mean mutual exclusion. Nor does it mean strict neutrality. It means a very flexible strategy of principal distance. What is principal distance? Principal distance is the notion that you may engage with religion or may disengage with it. You may engage with it positively or negatively. That is to say, you may intervene in religious affairs or not interfere, or refrain from interference in religious affairs, depending entirely upon whether this interference or non-interference will promote certain values, that is to say, freedom and equality, and reduce both intra and inter-religious domination. So the model that is developed in Indian secularism, because of its civilizational ethos, is quite different from the model that developed in the West, broadly speaking, which has focused much more on intra-religious domination and which has unpacked the metaphor of separation differently. So we have, because of these different civilizational or different background cultural conditions, the development of different models of secularism. I've talked only about two, but there can be many, many secularisms. So the idea of multiple secularisms is, in my view, a very valid kind of idea, and Shmuel and others have played a very important contributory role in influencing the birth of ideas of this kind. Thank you.